Hi, Aurora. This is Diana with Aurora Water Conservation, and I'm going to be talking to you today about installing a water-wise landscape. So today's goals are to talk about the step-by-step conversion process, everything from design all the way to maintenance. Now, the first thing that you need to do is prepare your site. So you'll need to contact Colorado 811 before you dig so that you know where that it is going to be safe for you to dig and you're not going to disturb or harm any underground cables, wires, or other utilities. They will get marked and you'll be able to reference that information after they come out and mark the lines. You'll also want to consider your own safety. Make sure you've got proper protective equipment. Things that we recommend are stuff like gloves. I personally like leather gloves. They're very durable. Love to wear a hat and sunscreen, long pants and long sleeves, and also knee pads. Really want to avoid injury. Which leads me to my next point, which is warming up or stretching. I know it takes an extra few minutes, but it'll be so much better for your muscles and your joints in the long run. So try to do at least an easy warm up or dynamic stretch before you get working. Remember to hydrate regularly and take plenty of breaks. I definitely need to have my snack breaks while I'm working on a difficult project. And then also break up the project into achievable phases. If you're able to, also create a timeline, one that can be a little bit flexible so that you can take into account things taking longer than you first originally thought they might. Hopefully you've got a landscape design that you're really happy with and excited about. A to-scale, well thought out design is going to help you make sure that you are building an attractive landscape. It's going to be easier to implement and also easier to phase. If you can't do the whole thing at once, just tackle one part of your landscape that is designed, and then you can the next season work on the next one. And also to help you save money and time in the long run because things will be well planned out and you won't have as much or hopefully any guesswork. It's also required if you are trying to apply for the GRIP rebate. That's the Grass Replacement Incentive Program rebate that's available to all Aurora Water customers. So that's required in order to qualify for the rebate. When you're working on your design, you can work with a professional and they'll take all of these things into consideration. But if you're creating your design yourself, which you're more than welcome to do, we recommend that you choose your water-wise plants carefully. You need to consider the water and sun requirements for these plants because not all water-wise plants are created equally. There's a lot of variety out there, and they do have different sun exposure and watering requirements. Everything from no water after establishment to still needing about 15 inches of water throughout the growing season. You'll need to think about how big they get and so how far they should be spaced apart. Do you want a sparse look or do you want a really dense look? So you'll be layering the plants together and you do want them to touch. So you really need to know how big that they get when they're mature. And then think about color and texture, not only of the blossoms, but also the leaves, the foliage. What does it look like? Is it fuzzy? Is it glossy? Is it different colors? And you want to make sure that those things work well together. Think about how tall they're going to get at maturity. And also, do they provide any seasonal interest? So, do they have an interesting seed head that you can have them leave on over the winter, not prune them back to provide some interest in your landscape? Think about how these plants reproduce. Do they have a lot of seeds? Are they going to self-seed regularly and you'll have a lot of volunteer plants coming up, which you may or may not want? Maybe they reproduce via runners, or maybe they need to be divided like an iris every few years. That's something to consider when you're deciding whether you want that plant in your yard or not. And then how many different kinds of varieties are there? Are there lots of different colors? Like another, again, example is iris. They come in almost every color of the rainbow. If you're a new gardener, stick to fewer varieties. Get to know those plants and you'll know exactly how to maintain them every year. But also consider, on the other hand, if you're a more experienced gardener or really excited about gardening and have a lot of time to devote, maybe you want a larger diversity or variety of plants. You also want to consider, in terms of diversity, a mix of different plants like shrubs versus ornamental grasses versus perennials, what they add, what kind of seasonal interest they have in your garden, so that it'll make for a more beautiful space year round. Another thing to do is understand the existing conditions that are at the site. So, what is your sun exposure like? Do you have really hot areas that stay cooler for longer in the year? What is your soil type? Do you have a slope and how severe is it? What about winds? Are you on the eastern part of Aurora, a little bit higher elevation, definitely a lot windier than some other parts? And then also, are there any utility easements? So Excel is our energy provider, and usually they have areas where you can't plant trees or put any patios or any concrete slabs. So you want to avoid any of those features in those areas because they may have to dig there when they're doing improvements. So each of these factors can be, or each of these conditions should be factored into your design and make sure that your design is as functional as you need it to be. Aurora does have a lot of different soil types. Usually it's very clayey or very sandy, and sometimes those different kinds can occur in the same neighborhoods or even on the same street. So you might want to consider a soil test. Finally, we do have some really nice resources available to the public, excuse me, to Aurora Water customers, our free landscape design program. You'll work with a landscape designer to develop a design at no cost and a plant list along with that design. It is a program that's separate from the WaterWise rebate, known as, again, it's called GRIP, and that is just available to Aurora Water customers. But available to the general public on our website, we have 9 different design mock-ups with plant lists with different themes. So everything, as you can see here, from a landscape that's thinking about pollinators, all the way to a prairie style, even to a plant list that's all natives. So you can check those out at auroragov.org. So when you are looking to implement your design, you'll need to do pretty much all of these tasks, depending on what kind of design you've created. So that includes removing existing vegetation. Any major demolition, you have to change if you want to change the grade or the slope of your yard, or if you want walkways or patios. You can consider installing a landscape feature. So Aurora considers that a berm, boulders, or a rock wall. You can also think about additional landscape features like a dry creek bed or maybe a pathway. Then, of course, there's planting your new plant material. Adding edger. Edger typically is going if you're separating grass that's remaining, or maybe you're putting in some native grass. So you're separating that from your mulch garden beds. And then irrigation installation, if you have to install a new irrigation system or you're changing out from a pop-up system to a drip system, you'll need to develop all of that. And then finally, mulching with your preferred styles and types. The first step is removing the existing vegetation. So there are several methods to talk about when you're going to remove the existing vegetation. So one is mechanical, another is chemical, and the third we call smother. So the benefits to using a sod cutter is it's really fast. Depending on the square footage that you're removing, you can get it done in a day or a weekend, or maybe even less if it's a small area. It doesn't use any chemicals. That's the other pro. Now, the cons are it is labor intensive. The sod cutter itself is a pretty heavy machine. You have to make sure that you've prepped your soil a little bit. You have to dispose of the sod. You've got to be careful around tree roots. And then you're probably going to rent a sod cutter, so you have to consider the cost. Now, the chemical is spraying the turf with a chemical so that it dies. And you need a non-selective herbicide. The most common one is glyphosate. The pro there is that you get pretty quick results. It might only take up one application, though usually it takes about 2, so that you're looking at 2 to 4 weeks of that. And the cons are that obviously you're using a chemical bad for plants, so you want to make sure that you're being really specific where you're spraying. And then you have to buy the chemical and the way to apply it. So usually it's a sprayer, and you have to wear the proper protective um, for that. And then the smother method is just what it sounds like. It's cutting the grass that you're going to kill really, really short and then covering it with layers of newspaper and putting mulch on top. The pro there is you're not using any chemicals, you're not moving heavy sod, you're not disposing of that, so it's cheaper. But the con is that it could be a long process. We'll go through each of these one by one. So here is a picture of someone using a sod cutter and rolling up a roll of sod. So in this instance, again, you want to mow the existing grass short, and you do want to lightly water it a few hours in advance, up to 24 hours in advance, so that the sod cutter is moving more easily through the soil. You have to rent the sod cutter. You can do a big box store, or you can do a rental. Those also exist a few places across the Denver metro area. You want to wear your proper safety equipment because you are, again, using machinery. So you want to make sure that you have gloves and probably eye protection just in case. Then you have to figure out what to do with the old sod. You can compost it. You can give it away. Pretty common to list sod on different sites and have people just come pick it up for free. A lot of people are for sod, but usually they're looking for sod in good condition. So if you have a lot of weeds, they might not want to take that. You can also use the sod if you've got a berm in your landscape design. You can use it as the base for your berm or repurpose it maybe in another way. Or you have to take it to the landfill, and that has fees associated with dumping at the landfill. You do want to make sure that you're staying clear of tree roots. The rule of thumb is that the tree's drip line, which is the way where the farthest branches reach out, and then the line, if you were to draw a vertical line straight down or drop something from those outermost branches, that around the ground is where the drip line is. And that is where the most important roots to a tree exist. So you want to avoid, if at all possible, cutting using the sod cutter within the drip line of the tree because, again, you could damage those vital tree roots and could lead very quickly to that tree's decline. And here's an example of a project installation timeline if you're using the sod cutter method. So because it is the fastest, like we said, you can get it done in about a week. And then all of the other things that you have to work on to complete your installation of your project get done by about week 6. And if you're doing the GRIP program, you would be requesting your inspection for week 7. But that's only for folks who are involved in the GRIP rebate. There's no inspection that takes place through the city if you are not doing the rebate program. You don't have to worry about that. Now, the second method is using herbicide. So like I said, you'll use a non-selective herbicide that uses glyphosate, and that's the main ingredient. You want to make sure that you thoroughly read the instructions and follow the instructions on the bottle because overusing glyphosate can be detrimental to other plants in your yard or in your neighbor's yard. So you want to make sure you use that. You're going to need a sprayer, just like in the picture here of some kind. This is a 5-gallon sprayer. They also come in smaller sizes. For the most part, glyphosate-based herbicides are going to work best when it's warm. So minimum 60 degrees and about maximum 85 degrees. It has to be low wind. You want to wear proper protective equipment. You don't want to get this chemical on your skin. So you need to wear closed-toed shoes, long sleeves, and long pants and gloves when you're wearing it. And eye protection is always a good idea. You don't want to spray around any other plants if the herbicide is taken up by the plant leaves. So you want to avoid any other plant leaves besides your grass. And that's why it's also a good idea not to spray when it's windy. So first thing in the morning on a warm morning is the best option because that's when it's least windy. And then finally, it can take up to hopefully not 3 applications. You do have to wait 7 to 10 days between applications, so that's why it can take up to 3 or 4 weeks, just depending on how the grass responds. Now, once the grass is thoroughly dead, you'll know because it turns kind of a gray-y brown, and if you're pulling the grass out, if you're tugging at it, it readily comes off. That means the grass is dead. That's when you can install your project. And here's another example of a timeline. So this one we add another week. You might even want to add 2 weeks, so it could take 7 or 8 weeks until you finish your inspection. And then finally, the smother method. So this is the one where you'll use newspaper or cardboard. We prefer newspaper. Make sure that you're using soy-based ink newspapers. Most are. Will naturally decompose in the soil over time. The first thing to do is to cut the grass as short as you can get it. The shorter, the better. You might even want to consider using a trimmer to really cut it down all the way to the base so that it doesn't add a lot of extra bulk as the grass decomposes. It'll be more at the soil level that it will eventually turn into when the grass decomposes. You have the option to use amend the soil with compost at this time by rototilling it in, but you don't have to do that. You can add compost when you're planting each individual plant. What you'll do is you'll layer at least 4 or 5 sheets of newspaper or a couple of sheets of cardboard, making sure everything overlaps so no sunlight is getting through. You can lightly water it so it creates a little bit of a paper mache effect. So if you're working, it's a little bit windy, it's less prone to blow away if it's a little bit moist. And then you cover that with at least 3 inches of mulch. Now, you have to wait. So you don't disturb this. You're waiting for all of that grass to die off over the course of the next 6 weeks or so. And this can take 6 or 7 weeks for the grass to completely die. You'll need to check on it, like dig a little bit and check to see that the grass is completely dead. Again, you'll be able to tell because it's turning like a gray brown. And when you tug at the base of the grass, it comes up fully because it is completely dead. And it's not until it's completely dead that then you can go ahead and start planting. So here's a time like you see it's much longer. You want to start the process really like earlier in the spring that you would probably the other methods. You can start in the summer and then you probably wouldn't do your planting until the fall. So you can consider either way. But either way, it's taking about 10 weeks or 11 weeks until you can, again, if you're going through the GRIP program, requesting your inspection. So it's really important to work out your timeline in the planning process. Know which kind of method you're going to use, and then work backwards from there to decide when you're going to start your installation. When you do your site layout, you need to consider important it is to accurately place your beds, and your plant material according to your design. In most cases, it's okay to be off by a few inches in placement, but you want to strive to be accurate to your design. So lay it out, everything out there. Mark the layout of your landscape features with, you can use a lot of different things. You can use paint, like landscaping paint. You can use, depending on what kind of material starting out with, you can use chalk. I have used a garden hose to kind of the look of a pathway. Also some ideas on how you can locate or mark the location of your landscape features. Then you'll want to mark the location of plants that you haven't yet purchased. That's when flags, landscaping flags or irrigation flags or even stakes or even hefty looking sticks, you can put those in the ground to mark the location of plants that you haven't purchased yet. And then for the ones that you have, physically put them out in the locations they're supposed to be before you start digging any holes. It's a lot easier to move that than to move a hole that you've already begun to dig. Forget to use a measuring tape to determine the proper location, the distance between each of the plants, because the plants that you're playing with that you've purchased are very small and young compared to the mature sizes. So don't just eyeball it. Get a measuring tape and use it to mark the distance between the plants according to your design. So landscape features, I've already mentioned those a few times. The ones that we require for front yards or any part of a yard that faces a public right-of-way, that it's going to be 3 boulders, a berm, or a rock wall. There are additional features that aren't required but can look beautiful in your yard, like a dry riverbed, a walkway, maybe a patio. You can use different kinds of flagstones or pea gravel. There are lots of options, and those are all doable that really enhance a landscape. One thing to note is there are size requirements for the boulders, the berm, and the rock wall. With the berm, you don't want to go very high and steep because it's difficult to retain water in that soil, and a lot of times the mulches or the soil will start to erode. So you want to stick with a rise of 1 foot over a run of 4 feet. So it is quite sloped. You'll need 3 boulders that are at least 2 feet by 2 feet, and then the rock walls have to be at least 10 feet long. The rule of thumb is it needs to look like a wall and not a door. In addition to the landscape features that aren't required that I have listed at the bottom, you can also think about benches or pergolas or arbors. They can just be gorgeous in a water-wise landscape. When we're looking at boulders, you want to make sure that you don't just plop the boulder on top of the soil, on top of the mulch. A boulder looks best when you create a little bit of a cradle for it in the soil. It looks more natural, like it's been there for 100 years. When they're just plopped on top, they look pretty silly. I've done that, I've made that mistake, and boy, do they look better when they've been dug into the soil just a little bit. And you can make sure you fill in the soil around them so they're kind of snuggled in, and then you can put your mulch on top. You want to place your boulders, your rock walls, or your berms before you install any plant material. After your irrigation is done, but before your plants. A couple tips about edging. Edging is available in plastic rolls or metal strips. The minimum height, 4 inches. That's usually the size that you see at the store anyhow. And it should be used to separate beds from grass. And that can be native grass, or if you keep Kentucky bluegrass in your yard. Either way, you're separating those beds. I also use it for so on edges of pathways. You don't have to use it, but that's what I have used, and it helps keep the mulch a little bit out of the pathway. So to install it, you need to dig a narrow trench, very narrow trench, usually only 3 or 4 inches wide. I usually just use a shovel, and then I'll hand trowel to really dig out and make sure that it's level. Place your edging, and then you will put it into place with a hammer or a rubber mallet. I like to use a rubber mallet because it is a rolled top edge that I have used. And if you're using plastic, you definitely want to use something softer like a rubber mallet instead of a steel hammer. You'll put edging pins, and you'll tap it until you get it to the right height. You want it very, very close to the height of the soil. So we've got a great example on the right. The roll top is just like a centimeter above the height of the soil and of the rock mulch. And then on the left, you can see a lot of the edging, actual horizontal edge of the edger, and you shouldn't be able to see that. So don't do what that person on the left did, and make sure that it's tapped down into place. Then you'll secure it with the metal pins, and you can put those about 1 pin every 3 to 5 feet. Where there is overlap, you do want to overlap your edger, and you can put 2 pins in the overlapped section to make sure that they are secure. If you're using edging that meets a concrete like sidewalk or your driveway, you should make sure that the edger terminates a 1/2 inch below the grade. So it does tend to pop up a little bit over the years, and you want to make sure it doesn't become a tripping hazard. So you want to make sure it actually goes below the edge of that concrete pad. Don't use edging to keep mulch off the sidewalk. We've got an example of what to do coming up. You don't need to put edger along the sidewalk because the sidewalk is the edger. The sidewalk is a much more stable edger than anything else you can put in the landscape. Fabric. I have a love-hate relationship with landscape fabric. It should not be visible. What it should do is it deters weeds, but not forever. What landscape fabric is great for is areas where there's no plant material, because it is creating a bit of a buffer between precipitation and the air and the soil. And you want all of the moisture that we receive naturally and that you irrigate to get to the plants. So putting landscape barrier right around the plants, disallowing some of that precipitation to actually get to the plant roots where it's needed. So we recommend using it just under mulches where aren't going to be any plant materials. So in the picture on the right, several feet that doesn't have any plant material. So that's a great spot for landscape fabric to deter weeds, at least for a little bit. Under pathways, or where you don't have plant material in between the pavers, like a lot of people like to put some like thyme or short growing plants there. If you don't have any plants, that's where you want to put the landscape fabric. When you are installing it, you want to secure that fabric to the ground using long landscape pins, and you'll fold the edges underneath so that the corners don't pop up like you're seeing on the left-hand side. It's popping up right around that plant. So two bad things in the left-hand side picture. Not only can you see the landscape fabric and it's ugly, it's also right around the plants where you don't really want to have it. And another big note is to use plastic sheeting. Always use the fabric. It's woven together, it stays together a lot longer, and it doesn't disintegrate as quickly in the sun. The sun's UV rays can really damage plastic sheeting, and then it just shreds. And then you've got little bits of plastic all over your yard. So stay away from the plastic. Just do the fabric if you're going to do it at all. Now, here are some recommendations about planting. So we talked about using a measuring tape. So here we are making sure that these two blanket flowers are properly separated, keeping in mind that they are going to get much larger, and so they will grow closer together without touching. And that's what we wanted according to this design. Then after you've placed them, then you'll start digging your holes. So if you have existing mulch like this pea gravel in this picture, that pea gravel is raked aside or scraped aside. I like to sometimes use a tarp where I put my mulch on there, or if you've got enough room, just move it to the side by several feet. Then you will dig the hole twice as wide as the container and just as deep as the soil in the container, because you are wanting to basically match the growing condition of the plant's roots, what they've been growing in. So they don't want to be buried. We'll talk about that in a second with the depth of the hole, but we like to dig it twice as wide so those roots have lots of room to grow out, and just as deep so we're not burying them. Then you check the hole depth, make sure it's just at the height of the top of the root ball. So again, we don't want to bury it like in the second picture. We want to make sure that the plant is just the right height to match the existing root ball layer. A lot of the plants that we see are planted too high, and there's can be like a half or an inch. I've even seen like 2 inches of the root ball sticking out of the hole, and that root ball is going to die. It's going to dry out, and that plant is going to die most likely. So save yourself a lot of time and money, and put some extra effort to dig that hole to just the right height. You can also take this moment to add compost. So for the soil that you've pulled out of the hole, you'll mix some compost in there, about half to a full container of amendment mixed into that soil. Mix it up together in that pile that's off to the side, and then that's what you'll use to replace it when you're backfilling the plant and getting it into its new home. So use your hands, not your feet, to apply moderate pressure to firm that soil. You're trying to remove air pockets, but not crush the roots with your feet or heavy stomping. And then go ahead and thoroughly water. So you want to get close to the plant, use a hose nozzle, and they might settle a little bit. So if the root ball is exposed, add a bit more soil. You'll probably have a little bit more left over because you've added that amendment. And then you can water it down one more time, and then go ahead and gently move that mulch back into place. Trees are a little bit different. You actually don't want to don't want to plant them at the height of the root ball. It should be a few inches above the soil grade. Our forestry division has a really great example of a video, and called Tree Planting and Care information. They've got information sheets. Check out their video. You'll see great examples of how to plant trees. Next, you'll want to choose your mulch and put down your mulch. So you can choose organic or inorganic mulch. Organic mulch is ones that are from plants. So a lot of it's tree bark based. Sometimes you'll see cocoa coir is used as a mulch. There are a few other examples, but usually we see kind of bark mulch. There's also recycled pallets, and you can get that, and those are a little cheaper. We prefer the ones that aren't dyed because when they're dyed organic mulches, you do have to replenish them more frequently because that dyed red or dyed black color kind of leaches out with exposure and with precipitation. So you do have to replenish them more often to retain that color or to maintain that color. And inorganic mulches are just generally rock mulches, lots of different kinds. Why is mulch important? It has so many benefits. It retains moisture in the soil. It helps create a tidy look. It prevents erosion, so your soil isn't just eroding away with precipitation. It helps keep your plants clean when we do have those big rain and storm events, and also prevents soil compaction. So you want to walk through your yard and look at all the beautiful flowers, but you don't want to compact the soil because it makes root growth more difficult. And so it helps prevent that. And it also helps to prevent weeds a little bit. Not 100%, but it does deter weeds, especially the ones that are low growing like spurge and purslane. You'll want at least 3 inches of mulch. We recommend 3 to 4 to provide full coverage evenly across your project. There are calculators. There are a few different options online. Some of our favorites are from Home Depot or Lowe's or Pioneer, but there are many different options available to calculate how much mulch you'll need at a depth of 3 inches. You'll want to keep the mulch away from the trunk of trees. We call that volcano mulching, where it looks like you have created this huge pile of mulch right around the tree. It's not good for mulch to be right against the trunk of the tree because it actually invites pests, maybe even disease, to infiltrate the tree. So make sure you keep the mulch away from the trunk, away from the barch. And you'll want to also keep mulch a few inches away from any spreading ground cover plants that you have. So like your ice plants or your woolly thyme or woolly veronica, you want those to spread and mulch will kind of deter that. So every month or so, you'll kind of want to pull the mulch away from those plants so they can keep spreading. Now, here's that diagram of keeping mulch from spilling onto a sidewalk. This is a best practice. So you want to use the sidewalk to your advantage. You don't want your rock or your wood mulch being up on top of the soil that is already at ground level with your concrete pad. So what you do is actually taper the soil, change the rate of the soil and taper down 3 to 4 inches over the course of 18 to 24 inches per the second image there. So that when you lay your mulch, like in the third picture, it has something to lay against and it really won't be noticeable. The picture is an example of what not to do. You don't want to make it really, really narrow strip there. You want to widen it back from the concrete edge at least 18 inches. So it's a gradual slope because then that rock mulch or the wood mulch, if it starts to tumble, it won't get momentum and over onto your concrete. We also would dissuade folks from putting pea gravel, which is a type of rock mulch that's small. It's about the size of maybe kidney beans. And it can be a slip hazard if it's right along the concrete edge and starts to fall onto the concrete and spill over. It can really be slippery, and we don't want anyone to get injured. So avoid pea gravel in the last at least 12 inches next to concrete edge. Go with something a little bit bigger there. And let's talk about irrigation. It is a very big topic. We're just going to go over it very briefly. We have other irrigation classes that you may be interested in taking to learn more. There are lots of different ways to get water to your plants, and even our hardy, super low water plants do require an establishment period where they're given extra water to acclimatize to their new environment, which is your yard. So a lot of different ways to do that. It's something that can't be ignored. Every plant's going to need it at least at first. So one thing you can do is hand water. It's moderately water efficient. It gives you time to go and look at your plants and get to know them and see how they're doing because you're just going to be spending more time with them if you're hand watering. But on the flip side, it also takes more of your time because you'll probably be watering every other day, at least initially. And it's difficult to know how much water you're using with hand watering. And of course, we always recommend that when you've got your hose, you're also using a nozzle on that hose because no plant wants to be blasted with 7 gallons per minute from a hose. They want it much more gentle. So use a hose nozzle. Another thing you can do is a sprinkler system. So the pro is that you can see it working, but if you're using pop-ups, you're gonna lose some of that water to evaporation. If it's windy when the watering is happening, you're gonna get that drift and you're gonna get overspray. And also as your plants grow, they're gonna obstruct the stream of the pop-ups unless you have all low plants or only native grasses that you've installed. But otherwise, there's a variety of heights and widths of these plants, and they'll get bigger and they will obstruct the flow. And so that plant will get a ton of water, but the plant behind it won't get any. And then the third method is with a drip system, and that is what we recommend. It is the most water efficient system. The drip line is right on the ground, so there's very little evaporation. It's watering it right near the roots of the plants where you want it, and it's a really flexible system. You can manipulate a drip system so that the lines go anywhere you want them. And then the con there is a problem with the system. If there's like a break, sometimes it can be difficult to find because your system lies on top of the soil but underneath the mulch. So the thing is the when you're irrigating trees, you'll want to make sure that you're removing turf. When you're removing turf, usually the trees are getting a certain amount of water. And so when you are removing the turf and changing your irrigation system, then you still want to forget about your trees. They still need water. Trees generally aren't xeric. They can be drought tolerant. So every few years, if there's a drought, they can serve. There's certain types of trees will survive that well, but it doesn't mean overall they can do well with less water all the time. So there's a great resource from Aurora Department's tree watering guide. So we recommend that you search for that Aurora Forestry Tree Watering Guide. You can find that online. And it provides recommendations on how to treat your trees and water them during the first year after you've changed to a landscape, a water-wise landscape, and then how to water ongoing for them. And then finally, I just want to touch on maintenance. So weekly and monthly, you're going to be weeding. The weeding never stops. It's true. No water-wise landscape is going to be weed-free, just like no landscape is going to be weed-free. You'll want to deadhead some of your plants. Do a little bit of research, see if any of your plants respond with deadheading. That just means that you're removing the spent blooms to increase blooming. There are some plants like Shasta daisies that when they're deadheaded, they are signaled to bloom again. And so you can get a longer, colorful season out of some of these plants with deadheading. You also want to walk through your garden and check for plant health, look for any problems, check your drip system if you've converted to drip, and look for any breaks. At least once a month, but a couple more times a month is great. And honestly, your new landscape's going to be so beautiful. You'll want to be out there any week anyway. And then occasionally you may need to prune shrubs. Hopefully your design is such that you provided spacing for your shrubs to grow into their full size without needing pruning. But once in a while something happens, or maybe there's a over the winter and you will have to prune it back. So you may have to do that occasionally. You'll want to divide ornamental grasses every few years because they do grow out and then they leave a dead center. And so the way to handle that is digging it up, dividing it, and then replanting or giving it a couple to a neighbor and have them how to plant them in their yard. And then you may also need to replenish your mulch as it does disintegrate and adds to your soil over time. So every 3 or 4 years, depending on what kind of mulch you have, you'll want to add a little bit more on top. In the springtime, that's the time to cut back any perennials, remove the plant material that died over the winter, and add that to your compost or put that in the trash. And then you can also cut back most ornamental grasses at that time. Same thing, removing dead plant material from the ornamental grasses and composting or trashing that. In the summer, obviously, that is weeding and watering time. That is pretty much what we're doing then, making sure we're watering enough to keep the plants healthy, but not overwatering. And then in the fall or winter, if you have planted new trees, you'll want to wrap them with tree wrap that helps them stay, especially if they have thin or dark bark with the rapid fluctuations in weather and temperatures in winters, you help them be more resilient and stand up to those temperature changes. So it helps them weather periods, no pun intended. And then if we don't have a lot of snow or other precipitation over the winter, you will want to do some winter watering of your trees if the temperatures are 40 degrees or higher and the ground isn't frozen. For irrigation, there's a little bit more maintenance to think about. You'll want to blow out the system before winter to avoid any costly and nasty breaks over the winter time. And then you'll want to visually inspect your system, whatever kind of system it is, whether it's a pop-up or drip. Starting in the spring or summer, you want to check your heads and emitters to make sure they're working properly and they're not clogged or broken or you're seeing any leaks. Check drip lines for breaks, and then also check your drip filter in your valve box and clean any screens. That can be an issue if drip system doesn't seem to be, if the water doesn't seem to be coming out, it might be a clogged filter. And then, of course, adjust your controller. Please don't set it and forget it. In the springtime, our plants need a lot less water than they do in July and August. So ramp up your watering to August and then taper it off towards the fall. Well, thanks everyone for joining me. This was a long class. I hope it was valuable to you. I hope you are excited to install your WaterWise landscape. Check out our free landscape design program and the grass replacement incentive program, aka GRIP, which is our WaterWise rebate. And keep your water wisely.